I had never been the type of person to dwell on the past. I always thought everyone had their skeletons in the closet, their mistakes, and that it didn't matter who you were, but who you became. But, as it turns out, it's easy to say that until you're faced with something that's difficult to accept. When I met my wife, Lisa, I thought my life was finally falling into place. This was my second marriage, and I hoped it would be my last. She wasn't just beautiful. She was smart, kind, caring, or at least that's how I saw her. Lisa was a couple of years older than me, and she had already gone through 2 failed marriages, but that didn't bother me. Everyone deserves a chance at a new chapter, right? We got married rather quickly. A few months after we met, we had a modest ceremony, and I moved into her house in the suburbs of Chicago. My apartment stayed rented out. Extra income never hurts. The first couple of years were good, even happy. Lisa was my rock, always smiling, always ready to listen. I, on my part, did everything I could to provide for us, as she valued comfort and liked to indulge in something nice every now and then. Still, there was something about her behavior that occasionally raised questions. Lisa avoided talking about her past. No, I didn't pry into her personal life, didn't demand reports on what came before me, but her reluctance to share anything personal sometimes struck me as odd. She could easily dodge questions about her family or the reasons behind her divorces. I thought it was normal until I learned she had a son. She told me she had lost him in a car accident when he was just a child. That was the only thing she ever mentioned about her past, and I never dared ask more. My job also demanded attention. I worked as a manager at a logistics company, and despite the constant stress, I loved my work. 6 months ago, our company underwent significant changes. The owner sold the business, and the new CEO, Tom Hendricks, decided to update the staff. Only a few employees, including me, were fortunate enough to keep their positions. Tom was principled, demanding, but fair. We hit it off quickly. However, he didn't give any special treatment, even to those he got along with. At work, we always maintained professionalism, but outside the office we could grab a beer, talk about life. Tom was 5 years older than me, but his energy and charisma were something to envy. He lived with his sister Molly, who raised her 7-year-old son. Tom shared that he had complicated relationships with his ex-wife, but he never went into detail. He didn't seem to like discussing his past, so I didn't feel obligated to open up about mine. One evening, during one of those friendly gatherings, he asked me about Lisa. I showed him a picture of her. That's when something strange happened. Tom went pale, his hands started shaking, and without saying a word, he abruptly changed the subject. The next day, he acted distant. We spoke only about work. For the next 2 days, he avoided discussing anything personal until he finally called me into his office. Tom was quiet for a while, then said, "Listen, Michael, I need to tell you something, but not here. Come to my place for my nephew's birthday, then I'll explain everything." I didn't press him, but his words left me uneasy. Why had the photo of Lisa affected him so much? What could he know about her that I didn't? These questions gnawed at me, but I kept my composure. Tom asked me not to discuss this with my wife, and I gave him my word. The day of his nephew's birthday arrived. Tom had Molly come pick me up. She drove us to a store to pick up a gift. Molly was friendly, polite, and, as it turned out, a pretty interesting conversationalist. When we arrived at Tom's house, it was a beautiful, cozy place in a quiet neighborhood. Tom greeted us at the door, and though he smiled, I could see a shadow of tension in his eyes. The evening went surprisingly smoothly. We ate, drank, laughed. But all the while, I felt the conversation with Tom looming closer. When the guests left, he took me into his office. Molly stayed with us, and Tom pulled a folder from his safe. What he showed me turned my world upside down. Tom opened the folder, and my heart tightened. I didn't know what to expect, but I already had a sinking feeling that this had something to do with Lisa. He pulled out an old photograph. It showed Tom, a young woman, and a child. I recognized the woman immediately. It was Lisa, though she looked younger, and her face expressed something I had never seen in her: tenderness and care. "This was 8 years ago," Tom began quietly. His voice sounded tired, as though he had been carrying this story for a long time. "This is my son and his mother, Lisa, your wife." The words hit me like a freight train. I felt everything inside me collapse. I wanted to ask how this was possible, but Tom was already speaking again. He told me his story. At the time, he had owned a small business, a sporting goods store in Denver. Lisa was his wife, and their son had just turned 1. Everything had been going well until the crisis hit. Tom got into a tough financial situation, and then his business partner betrayed him, leading to enormous debt. In an attempt to save his business, Tom borrowed money from shady people, who later began threatening his family. One day, returning home from work, he was beaten right in the parking lot. His attackers had clearly gone too far. Tom suffered serious injuries, spent several months in the hospital, and then another year in a wheelchair. During all that time, instead of supporting him, Lisa started seeing another man. Her new partner didn't want to take responsibility for another man's child, so Lisa left her son with Tom. She signed away her parental rights and then disappeared from their lives. Tom sold everything he had to pay off debts and protect his son. Only his sister Molly helped, working nonstop to keep them afloat. Together, they started over from scratch, and over the years, Tom managed to rebuild himself both physically and financially. I sat there, unable to believe what I was hearing. How was this even possible? Lisa had always told me that her son died in an accident. She had never mentioned anything like this. Tom showed me copies of the documents, the divorce certificate, the parental rights termination papers. All of it was undeniable proof. I tried to justify her actions in my mind. People make mistakes. Maybe she was desperate back then. But how could she abandon her own child? I had always seen Lisa as caring and kind, but now it all seemed like a lie. Tom said, "I don't want to interfere in your life, Michael. But I can't let Lisa come back into my son's life. To him, she's dead. He believes his mother died. It's better that way than knowing the truth." I sat in silence, trying to process it all. Tom continued, "You have to decide what to do next. I don't want to destroy your marriage, but you deserve to know the truth." That night was the longest of my life. I returned home with a sense of emptiness inside. My mind was flooded with memories of Lisa, of how she had been my support. Now it all seemed like a lie. When I walked into the house, she greeted me with a smile and asked how my evening had gone, but I just waved it off, saying I was tired. I looked at her and thought, "Who are you, really?" But I knew I couldn't say anything to her now. Tom had asked me to keep this to myself until I made a final decision, and I had promised. The next morning, I felt as if I had spent the night on a powder keg. My mind was consumed with the things I had learned. Lisa walked around the house as if nothing had changed, carefully setting breakfast in front of me as she did every morning. I looked at her and couldn't shake the feeling that I was seeing her for the first time. Could she really have abandoned her own son? Could the woman I had lived with for years be capable of that? I tried to occupy myself with work. Tom and I had discussed the new department project for the company, and I knew focusing on work would help me distract myself. But nothing worked. Every meeting with Tom in the office reminded me of what I had learned. He acted as professionally as always, but there was an undeniable tension between us, like an invisible wall. At home, I tried to act normal, but Lisa began to notice the changes. She asked what was wrong, if I was sick, why I had become so quiet. I brushed it off, saying I was tired and overwhelmed with work, but inside, I felt this false harmony wouldn't last long. A few days later, Tom spoke to me again. It was after another meeting. We were alone in his office. He offered me a drink, though I'd never been one to drink at work, but that day I accepted. We sat silently until he spoke. "I know what you're going through right now, It's not easy, but you have to make a choice." I looked at him, unsure of what to say. A choice. Like it was that simple. Tom continued, "I'm not asking you to leave her. It's your life, your decision. But you need to understand, she's the same woman who abandoned her child. That won't change." His words were blunt, no sugarcoating, and there was truth in them. I left his office with an even heavier heart. What was I supposed to do with this truth? How could I go on? That evening, I decided to go for a walk. Lisa was surprised that I was going alone, but didn't say anything. I just couldn't stay within four walls. As I walked through the streets of our quiet suburb, I thought back to our first months of marriage. Everything had seemed so right. We had settled into the house together, planned for the future. Lisa had always been by my side, always supportive. And now, I couldn't understand if it had all been genuine or just a mask. When I returned home, I found Lisa in the kitchen. She was sitting at the table with a cup of tea, looking out the window. I sat across from her. We sat in silence, and I could feel she wanted to say something but didn't know how. "Michael," she finally spoke, not looking at me. "You've changed. Something's happened. You're acting strange, like something's eating away at you." I felt a tightness inside me. This was the moment I had feared, but I wasn't ready for the conversation yet. So I simply said, "I'm just tired. Work's been busy." Lisa nodded, but her gaze remained cautious. She didn't believe me, I could see that, but she didn't press any further. The next few days passed in a strange and uneasy rhythm. Lisa behaved as usual, making dinner, smiling, asking about work, but now everything she said and did seemed staged to me. I could feel my own behavior shifting. I became more quiet, withdrawn. At work, I couldn't concentrate, and at home, I found myself looking for excuses to go to the garage or outside, just to be alone with my thoughts. Tom had advised me not to rush to conclusions, but in my case, that was impossible. The feeling that I was living with a complete stranger only grew stronger. One evening, while Lisa was busy with household chores, I sat on the couch, staring at our photographs on the wall. There were pictures from trips, snapshots from holidays. In all of them, Lisa looked happy, and I seemed happy too. But now, it all felt foreign. It was like I was looking at the life of another person. I tried to remember moments when she had spoken about her past, but there were very few. She always deftly avoided the subject, steering the conversation elsewhere. At the time, it seemed natural to me. Now, it looked suspicious. I knew I had to make a decision, but I didn't know where to start. Questions were swirling in my mind. What if she had changed? What if she regretted what she had done? But how could she regret it and still keep it hidden from the person she was living with? My inner peace crumbled with each passing day. Soon I did something I would have never allowed myself to do before. While Lisa was in the shower, I picked up her phone from the kitchen counter. Until this moment, I had never checked her things, never snooped through her messages. I always believed that marriage was built on trust, but now I couldn't ignore the thought. I had to know if she was hiding something else. The phone was locked, but I knew her password. She had typed it in front of me many times, and without realizing it, I had memorized the combination. After unlocking the phone, I started scrolling through the messages. Most of them were completely ordinary. Chats with friends, shopping lists, recipes. But one contact caught my attention. The number had no name, but it had a long chain of messages. At first glance, there was nothing unusual in the messages. Just a few neutral phrases like, "How are you?" "Everything okay?" and "Thanks for writing." But the tone of her replies made me uneasy. They were short, almost distant, but I knew she didn't respond like that if the person didn't matter to her. The number seemed familiar, but I couldn't remember why. Maybe it was someone from her past that I didn't know about. I took a picture of the screen, intending to look it up later. After I was done, I placed the phone back and felt dirty. It was an invasion of her privacy, but at the same time I knew I couldn't just ignore my suspicions. The next day, I decided to distract myself and went to a cafe after work. I needed time to think about what to do next. I sat at a corner table, sipping coffee and scrolling through photos on my phone. At some point, I noticed someone approaching my table. It was Molly, Tom's sister. She smiled, but there was concern in her eyes. "Hey, Michael, you look like you need someone to talk to," she said, sitting down across from me. I tried to brush it off, but she stopped me. "Listen, I know Tom told you everything, and I understand how hard this must be for you, but you're not alone in this." Her words took me by surprise. I wasn't used to sharing my feelings with others, especially with people I barely knew. But Molly was different. There was sincerity in her voice, and I realized I could trust her. "This just doesn't make sense," I finally said. "I can't understand how someone could abandon their own child. How could she leave him for what? A new life? A new partner? What could possibly justify such an action?" Molly listened carefully. She didn't interrupt or try to comfort me with empty words. Finally, she said, "Michael, I can't answer your questions. Only Lisa knows why she did what she did. But one thing I can tell you for sure. You deserve the truth. You deserve to know who you're living with." Her words were simple, but they carried great meaning. When I returned home, I felt like I couldn't put off this conversation any longer. Lisa greeted me at the door with a smile, but her face immediately changed. She noticed my mood. "We need to talk," she said quietly, looking me straight in the eye. And I realized that the moment had come. When Lisa said we needed to talk, I felt everything inside me tighten. This was the moment I had been waiting for and fearing at the same time. I sat down at the kitchen table, trying to stay calm, but inside, everything was boiling. She sat down across from me, setting a cup of tea in front of herself, and I noticed her fingers trembling slightly. "You've changed," she began, looking me in the eye. "The past few weeks you've been acting strange. You're quiet, withdrawn, almost not talking to me. Something's happened, Michael. Can you tell me?" Her voice was soft, but I could feel the tension in it. She wasn't herself either, it was obvious. But despite that, I said nothing. The words got stuck in my throat. She waited, but the silence stretched on, and it seemed to make her even more uneasy. "Michael," she started again, but her voice trembled. "If I did something wrong, just tell me. If I hurt you in some way, I want to know." She tried to sound confident, but I could see the fear in her eyes. She knew something was wrong, and perhaps she suspected that I had found out. I looked at her, and fragments of what Tom had told me came rushing back. Her past, her actions, and I simply couldn't understand how the person sitting before me could have done all that. There was nothing in her that resembled the woman Tom had described, but it was her, no doubt about it. "Nothing," I finally replied. "Everything's fine." She nodded, but her gaze remained wary. She didn't believe me, but she didn't push it further. We sat in that tense silence while I tried to sort through my thoughts. I needed time to figure out what to do next. The following day, when I was alone at home, I began to think again about what I had learned. My anger and disappointment grew, wave after wave. I opened my laptop and started looking up ways to trace the phone number I had taken a picture of. I found a few services that could help, and decided to try one of them. A few minutes later, I got a response. The number was registered under the name Richard Davis. The name meant nothing to me, but now I had a lead. I tried to find this person on social media, but came up empty. It could have been anyone, a colleague, an old friend, or maybe even the man she had left her son for. I didn't know, but my suspicions only grew stronger. In the meantime, Tom continued to insist that I not rush to a decision. He invited me out to meet for drinks, suggested we play a game of pool to take my mind off things, but I felt like I couldn't just forget about everything. With each passing minute, the situation seemed to consume me, leaving me unable to think of anything else. One evening, I decided to talk to Molly again. We met at the same cafe where she had found me the last time. She showed the same kindness and understanding I so desperately needed. I told her about the phone number, about my suspicions. She listened without interrupting and then said, "Michael, you need to ask her directly. I know it's hard, but you can't keep living like this. It will eat you up inside." Her words were the truth, and I knew it. I had to do something. But how do you ask? How do you tell the person you live with that you know about their past? I wasn't ready for this conversation, but I knew I couldn't delay it any longer. When I got home, Lisa was already asleep. I went into the bedroom and stared at her for a long time. She looked so peaceful, so innocent, like someone who had never done anything wrong. But I knew that wasn't true, and that knowledge was tearing me apart from the inside. The next morning, I woke up with a clear thought. Today, it has to end. I could no longer live with this burden, hiding behind the mask of normal life. This situation was poisoning me, my perception of Lisa, our family, even my work. Tom and Molly were right. I deserved to know the truth, but I also deserved to be free from this weight. No matter how it ended, I was ready. Lisa woke up before me. I heard her making breakfast in the kitchen. The sound was familiar, almost comforting, but today it only irritated me. I got up, got dressed, and went into the kitchen. She smiled, as always, and offered me coffee. Her simple gestures of care now felt empty. Maybe it was unfair, but I could no longer see her the way I had before. "Lisa," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked up at me, and I saw her smile begin to fade. "Is something wrong?" she asked cautiously. I took a deep breath. "We need to talk, and I want you to be honest with me. Please, no excuses, no half-truths. Just tell me everything as it is." Her face changed. I saw her tense up. She knew this wasn't just a casual conversation, but she still tried to avoid it. "Michael, you're scaring me. What's happened?" "I know about your past," I said. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. "I know you were married to Tom. I know you have a son, and I know you left him." The words hung in the air like thunder in a clear sky. Lisa froze. Her face turned pale. Her eyes darted from side to side, as if looking for a way out, but there was no way out. She stood there, and she had to face what she might have feared more than anything else. "Michael, it's not what you think," she began, but I cut her off. "Then tell me what it is. Tell me why you left your son. Tell me why you've lied to me all these years." She covered her face with her hands, and I saw her shoulders tremble. Maybe she was crying, but it no longer affected me. I just waited for her response. "I was young," she began after a long silence. Her voice was shaky. "I was scared. Tom was a good man, but his life was falling apart at that time. We had debts, threats. I didn't know what to do. And then I met—" I didn't let her finish. "Met who? The one who told you he'd save you if you left your child?" Her silence was the answer. "He said he didn't want to take responsibility for someone else's child," she continued, barely audible. I was stupid, weak. I couldn't cope. I thought Tom would take better care of our son than I could. So I left." I looked at her, and everything inside me was boiling. Her words didn't justify anything. They only showed how deeply wrong she had been, and how heartlessly she had acted. "And then, why didn't you ever try to come back? Why didn't you try to see your son?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "I was scared," she said. "I knew Tom hated me. I knew he'd never let me near them. And I just tried to start a new life." I couldn't listen anymore. Her excuses felt empty. She was trying to make herself out to be a victim, but to me it sounded like selfishness disguised as weakness. "I can't live with this," I finally said. "I can't live with a woman who's capable of something like this. You lied to me, lied to yourself, and worst of all, you betrayed your own child. It's over, Lisa." She didn't argue. Maybe she understood that all her words wouldn't change anything. Maybe she had known for a long time that this day would come. 3 months passed. Lisa and I got divorced. She went to stay with her relatives in another state, and I never heard from her again. Tom supported me in every way he could. He and Molly offered for me to stay with them until I figured out what to do next. Molly became more than just a friend to me. Feelings developed between us, and now I understand that she's the one I want to spend my life with. On New Year's Eve, I proposed to her. We started a new chapter, free from lies and the past, but sometimes I still think about Lisa. I wonder if she realizes what she's lost, or if she's still convincing herself that she did the right thing. Either way, it's no longer my problem.